back, guys. In the last video, we learned about callback functions, which are fundamental to understanding and working with the file system module in Node.js. Because callback functions reflect how Node.js handles asynchronous operations, which is the core concept in its non-blocking I/O model. So let's see that what is an FS module. The FS module enables interacting with the file system. This module in Node.js allows certain operations like reading, writing, deleting files, and etc. And many of these functions come in two forms: synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is blocking and asynchronous is non-blocking, or in other words, you can say that these use callbacks. Now, before we proceed to these synchronous and asynchronous methods, let me just show you that in order to search for these topics on the official Node.js website, that is nodejs.org, you will have to click on the docs. And it's recommended that you always refer to the documentation first in order to look for certain syntaxes. So you can search for file system here. You will be able to see here. And all you have to go for is, these are those methods that we are going to talk about. Well, there are a hell lot of methods, but I'll be giving you example for a few methods so that it will give you a kickstart in order to learn the rest of the methods yourself. Now let's say I want to look for a method called fs.readFile. So I got this here. We have already found it. You'll be able to check the syntax that shows the read file having the first parameter as the path. So path here means that the path of the file that should be read, that you want to read. Second parameter actually contains some optional parameter that can be skipped. If you don't want to use those optional parameter, you can skip them. And the third one is a mandatory parameter, that is a callback. So I recommend to use this documentation every time you're having some doubt regarding the syntax of any file system function. So you click on this, you will be able to see the meaning of these parameters in detail. Like the path could be a string, it could be a buffer, and there are some optional parameters which can be skipped, as I already told you. It could be encoding, you want to give some flag. For regarding flags, I'll talk about later. It could be a signal. But yeah, so we got two mandatory parameters, path and the callback. The callback function contains two mandatory parameters, the error and the data that should be read. And as you can see, that same syntax I have mentioned here as well for the asynchronous method fs.readFile, path, options, and callback. And for every asynchronous method, I have specified their synchronous counterparts. So maybe I'll be demonstrating one or two functions in this video, but the rest of the functions you will be trying yourself, and you are required to explore the other methods which I may not be explaining in this video. Now let's get started. I'm going to create a file with the name file system.js, and we are going to utilize the ES6 way of importing our modules. So I'll be using import fs from fs. And I will be declaring one variable, let's say file path. equals to, I need to mention the name of the file that I want to read. So I will be using read file here. Read file is the asynchronous method. So let's say I want to read the file called as, it could be any file with the txt extension, it could be a JSON file. So for simplicity, let me use txt. But before that, we need to have this file, that is test.txt. You can easily create this file here, test.txt, and mention something. Let's say, hello, how are you? Something like this. And what's the next thing? You need to now use fs.read file. So automatically you will start getting these suggestions. So remember, what was the first parameter? It was the path. So in case if your file is in some other folder, you can specify the path here. So for now, I'm going to mention this variable, that is file path. The second parameter was actually optional, containing encoding flags. So if you want to mention, you can, but by default it would be UTF-8. So let's mention UTF-8. By default it will be UTF-8 only. And the third parameter will be a callback. Now callback you can specify either as a traditional anonymous function, or you can specify an arrow function. I'm using an arrow function now. First parameter according to the syntax is the error. Second one is the data. Right, now inside this you're going to check that if there is error, then console.error, error in reading the file. Error in reading file. And you can also specify that error. So let's say it's error dot message. For now, let me just specify only error. And then return. So this will work in case if there was error, it has to return, or else console.log file contents are /n data. So this is the data which is actually going to be read. So I missed something here. Right, so this is now our arrow function. Let's now run this file. For running this, I'm going to use nodemon. In order to avoid executing the file again and again, nodemon, and then name of the file, that's file system. So what do you see? The file contents are hello, how are you? Okay, now contrary to this, now right now no error has occurred. It has already read the contents of the file. Now let's say if you want to show an error. So in what case error will be shown? It will be shown in case there was error in reading the file, or maybe the file did not exist at all. So you can mention, let's say, change the name of the file just to simulate. And you can see that the error object, this one, has now been displayed, containing the error number, code, system call, and path has been specified. So this error is just an object that contains the information regarding whatsoever the error has occurred. Now your file can be a JSON file as well. Let's say instead of writing test.txt, I can just have a text.json file. And let's create this test name.json. So we know that we need to have a JSON format. So we will be specifying, let's say, name as Raj and marks, let's say 23. Now you will be reading this file. So right now this is going to be, it's going to print it in the JSON format. So, but let's say if you want to print it as an object. So for this, you will have to parse the data before printing. So what you will be doing, you will be creating a separate variable. Let's say you will be specifying data, or let's say data1 equals to JSON dot parse. It will parse the data, and now the file contents will be printed as data1 instead of data, because now we want to print it in the form of an object. And as you can see, it has now converted your JSON data from the test.json into an object. Let's talk about another asynchronous method, that is write file. The write file contains the first parameter as the file or the path. Second one will be the data that is required to be written into the file, along with some optional parameters and a callback function. So let's see that how this works. So I'll just make a few changes. First of all, let's copy the same code and let's comment out this one. And here we will be using write file. This is write file. Okay, now this test.json, let's say I'm going to change this one to some file called as output.txt. So this output.txt file will be the one in which we will have to write down the data. And we also need to specify some content that needs to be written into the file. Const content equals to these are the file contents. So let's imagine that we want to have these are the file contents inside the file. Instead of read file, I'll be changing this one to write file. And few things are going to change now. So here, the second parameter will be the content. And the optional parameter, let it be UTF-8. And the callback inside, the parameter inside the callback function for write file will contain only the error parameter. So these syntaxes actually you will have to remember before you start coding. Documentation is always there for you. In case if there is any error, you can print a message, error in writing the file. Most of the time, this error is never going to happen. What is the reason? Because even if the file does not exist, even if your file output.txt, if it doesn't exist, it will create one for you. So here we can simply have file contents written. That's it. So let's take a look. File contents have already been written, and you can see because we had already executed using NodeMon, so it's already created. I'll do one thing. Let me just stop this for a while, just to see that changes are actually happening. Okay, now instead of putting the the string as the contents, you can also have some object. You can create an object, and you can write that object in the form of JSON into a JSON file. So the content here, let's say instead of this string, let it be an object. Let's say name Node.js, and let's say code is int triple two. Right. Now, whenever you're going to put this object inside this output.txt using write file, you will have to first of all stringify. So once again, you will have to content1. I'm creating another variable so that this can be stringified. Stringify is what? We can use this in order to convert the object into JSON. So the first parameter will be the actual content as the object. Second parameter, let it be null. And third one is that how many spaces do you want to have? I need 2 spaces. I have put here null because I want to stringify the whole object rather than specifying a particular key. So if you don't want to stringify a particular key but the whole object, so in that case you have to put here null. And the rest seems totally fine. So let's check it out. Here it will be content1. fs.write file, file path, content, UTF-8, error in writing file. Perfect. Now let's check nodemon file system and file contents written. Let's check output.txt. Okay, so by the way, I forgot to create output.json file, but that's okay, it doesn't matter. If you want to have output.json, then also it will create a separate file, output.json. So can you see that it really doesn't matter that whether your file is actually there or not, it will create one for you. That's the asynchronous method of read file and write file. Same way, you can also take a look at other functions like rename, unlink, copy file, append file. Let's take a look at the synchronous methods, how they are different from these asynchronous methods. We will start with read file sync. If you check the documentation, the syntax of read file sync is quite easy. You just have to mention the path or the file name that is required to be read, along with optional parameters. So let's see that how this works. Let's import our module. Import fs from fs. We need to create a simple variable, let's say data, that will contain the data which is being read. Read file sync. And you need to specify the name of the file that is required to be read. I'm going to specify test.txt, and in which format I want to have UTF-8. It will be UTF-8. If you are not using UTF-8, then you will have to explicitly convert your content into string format. So you're now going to print console.log data. Console.log data. So let's take a look if this works. Nodemon file system. All right. So what is being done here? Let's try to understand. Here in Node.js supports 2 module systems. One is CommonJS, normally called as CJS, which is the traditional system of using the require method. Means that instead of using import fs from fs, I can also use const fs equals to require fs. Actually, this is the traditional method that we don't follow this anymore, but if you check the result, you will be able to have it. So, but it should be avoided as it is not the ES6 now. So as I was explaining that there are two module systems, CommonJS, which is the traditional, that is this one. Second one is ECMAScript, that is ESM, ES6. This is the modern standard that uses the import or export statements. So if you really want to work with the ES6, then in that case, you will have to come to package.json and mention the type here. You must mention the type as module. Now you will be able to work with the ES6 standard even for the synchronous methods. Okay, anyhow, it's clear that read file sync is able to read the content of the file. But still we don't get that this synchronous method and asynchronous method, they feel the same because they are exactly printing the same result. So how do we really figure out the difference now? First difference is that you know very well that these don't contain the callback functions. It's a very simple syntax. Okay, now talking about the difference between this synchronous and its asynchronous counterpart, you can choose any two methods. Like you can choose write file sync, read file sync, doesn't matter. So I'll do one thing. In order to make you understand the difference, I'll just add a line over here. First of all, let me just stop this, and you add a line here, console.log program ended. Okay, now alongside, let me just copy this code here and I'll add another line here. Same line I'm going to add it here as well. Program ended. Alright, so at one time I'll run this, keep this commented, and vice versa. So can we just check the result, that what happens? So I'll just use Node this time for certain reasons. File system, Node file system, hello, how are you? And then it shows program ended, which is quite visible to us. It is synchronous. It is a blocking call, means that it will first of all read the file completely. It really doesn't matter that if there is some other request required to be entertained or completed. So this line, console.log program ended, has to wait till the file test.txt has been completely read. Okay, this is synchronous method. Now let me comment this code and we are going to uncomment this one. So let's check. Once again, I'm going to run. Let me clear the screen. Node file system. What do you see right now? It sees program ended and file contents are, while it was the opposite in read file sync. So really, what happened now? Why it is printing the line which should have been printed earlier, but it is printing now at the last. So what it does, it starts reading the file. Now, since asynchronous methods, they are non-blocking calls. Because they are non-blocking calls, the other requests don't have to wait. Now, if in case any IO operation, read-write operation is happening, then what will happen? The Node.js will move towards the request that could be handled, even if this particular file is being read. So instead of wasting time, it simply moves towards the last line. It will print this line first, and later on, when all the operation, the read write operation is done, then it will, once it is done reading the contents of the file, it is going to print the contents of the file. So this is what the difference between synchronous and asynchronous methods are. Alright, so we are now clear with these differences, but there might be one question arising in your mind, that if the asynchronous method contains a callback, because this is the identity of any asynchronous method, there is a way to handle the errors inside these asynchronous methods. But you can see that there is no way out here. We haven't used any callback because callback functions are never a part of the synchronous methods. So how you can actually handle the errors inside the synchronous methods? Well, very easy. It's possible using try and catch. So try it out yourself and mention how you're doing it inside the comment section. Now let's talk about the optional parameters. Well, many a times they are not required, but sometimes if you want to specify the flags, encoding we have already used, but if you want to specify flags, you can use these flags like R, R plus, W, WX. Their meanings are specified here. For example, if you want to open the file to read, then in that case use R, and it will throw exception if the file does not exist. Similarly, if you want to open the file to read and write, then use R plus. So I'll just use one or two of these in order to demonstrate their functionality. Now, since they are optional parameters, now you will be specifying them as an object. So you will be mentioning encoding should be UTF-8, and let's say flag, you are mentioning flag as R. Well, it has to be an object. Flag encoding, right? So let's check the result, node file system. So you see that the file contents are being read because you already opened the file because you wanted to read. By the way, most of the time these are not necessary, but let's say now you want to read the file, but this time you are specifying W. Now W means that a flag which is for writing into the file, but you want to read. So let's see that what happens now. So file system, it will show you an error because bad file descriptor, the flag you're using is W, which is for writing, but you want to read it. Hence there is contradiction, and that's the reason you can't read it. So guys, that's all for this video of file system. See you all in the next video.